I am Arya, and 25 years old. And for most of my life, I have been the quiet one who keeps the pantry stocked and the peace intact. My strength has always been patience, the kind that looks like silence until it doesn't. I will tell you how the first crack formed. It began on a summer night aboard a rented yacht where my Aunt Evelyn held up a silver key and said, "Clear enough for the band to pause. This life isn't yours." She slid a sealed envelope into my cousin Jordan's hand. The wax glowed under the lights, red as a stop signal. I held my water glass a little tighter and kept my smile where they could see it, which is the same as saying I swallowed the truth. Before I go further, tell me where you are watching from, and if family and money have ever collided in your life. You might want to stay with me. Jordan is the golden child. Everyone in our circle knows it, though only a few will say it out loud. He is a year older, all easy laughter and cufflinks. When he enters a room, the conversation leans his way as if chairs were on wheels. Aunt Evelyn narrates his life like a press agent, and Uncle Marcus plays the genial chairman. When Jordan brought home middling grades, they called him well-rounded. When I brought home top marks, they nodded and said that was expected. He received a 16th birthday car with a ribbon big as a beach towel. I received a bus pass and a lecture about independence. When he changed majors the second time, it was framed as exploration. When I kept a scholarship by working weekends, it was framed as obligation. If you have lived this contrast, you know how it works. One child is sunlight, the other is a good lamp. No one notices until the power goes out. The small things add up. At 12, I missed a promised museum trip because Jordan's summer clinic needed another payment. I watched Aunt Evelyn write a check while telling me art would wait. At 16, I took a night shift at a bakery to save for exam fees. My alarm rang at 4, and no one asked how I was managing school on so little sleep. At 18, graduation day. My name was called and the applause was polite. My ride home was a rideshare because the family had left early to make Jordan's dinner reservation. I learned to move around. These moments, the way a person learns the creak of old stairs, place your foot where it won't be heard. College sharpened the pattern. I filed my own aid forms. I balanced seminars with weekend work. I counted coins for groceries and laughed about it because laughter is cheaper than pride. When I phoned home, the questions were about Jordan's internships. When I visited, the refrigerator was full, but the conversation was thin. Still, I kept notes on opportunities like a bookkeeper keeps ledgers. Patience. I told myself, build now, speak later. If I am honest, I kept loving them in the simplest way I knew. I helped. When Uncle Marcus had a medical scare, an unpaid balance lingered. I called the hospital and settled it anonymously, $36,000. Arranged through a friend. So my name would not appear when Jordan needed to secure a lease for a shinier car. I pushed a transfer that covered $22,000 and let him believe an old contact had done him a favor. When the pantry at my aunt's house looked thin in midwinter, I set up deliveries that arrived like clockwork. I wrote the sender line as a community program so no one would look too closely. I told myself generosity would keep the peace until I could stand somewhere of my own. Perhaps you will say that was naive. I will not argue. Love sometimes wears a blindfold to keep walking. The older generation would call me practical. I kept a small apartment share and a ledger of expenses. I learned to say no to shoes and yes to insurance. My job in New York was steady. A content strategist's desk by a window and a manager who valued finished work over loud meetings. On the side, I took quiet contracts that paid in ways the family never counted. Because in their arithmetic, only visible success belongs to you. My savings account grew by increments. I moved money the way a squirrel moves acorns, never in a straight line, always with winter in mind. What I did not understand not fully was how my patients looked to them. Silence reads as permission to people who enjoy being loud. By the time I turned 25, the requests had changed tone. Aunt Evelyn began sliding papers across the kitchen island with her morning coffee, a household contribution agreement asking for $1,500 each month because, as she put it, family life has costs. A draft of a power of attorney, she said, would keep things orderly because big decisions make young people nervous. I stacked the papers and said, I meant it. I think before I sign, and I sign only what I understand. I am not here to lecture law, but I will say this much because it matters. The guardianship that put me in their care ended at 18. An education trust established years ago was scheduled to vest in my name at 25. I did not broadcast those lines. I wrote them quietly in my journal. The way a map maker sketches a shore before the tide goes out. My aunt and uncle knew the dates, of course. Every trustee knows the calendar. But knowledge does not always bring peace to people who love control. The yacht party was called a celebration of Jordan's new degree. You know, the kind of event. I mean, napkins starched, band paid, to sound effortless, phones held high to catch the glitter. The air smelled like citrus and salt. The city lights made the river look like a string of coins. I found a seat along the rail and practiced being small. When the toast began, Aunt Evelyn lifted that silver key and the sealed envelope and told the guests it represented a brilliant future. She did not say mine. Then she glanced at me just long enough to make sure I had heard and added with a smile that had edges, "This life isn't yours." It is a strange thing. The moment you stop being invisible to yourself, the band resumed, plates clattered, people laughed in the bright, brittle way they laugh at other people's success. I folded my napkin and thought about the papers on the kitchen island. I thought about the calendar I carried in my head. I thought about the way a lock looks from the inside when you finally find your own key. What I did not know then, and this is the part that turned the tide, was that someone had filmed the moment on a phone. The clip would make its way into a family group chat before midnight, complete with a caption. I have memorized. You should be grateful we even let you in the family photo. But I am ahead of myself. We will get there in time. For now, I didn't know this. I went home from the party with a calm. I did not expect. I wrote 3 lines on an index card and slid it under my pillow. 1, no signatures under pressure. 2, no payments without clarity. 3, no more pretending banter is love. Then I slept like a person who has finally found the door in a dark room. If you have ever sat at a table that was not truly yours, you will recognize the quiet that follows. It is not rage, it is resolve. And if this sounds like your life, stay with me. What comes next is where the story changes. By the time I turned 21, the requests had stopped sounding like favors and started sounding like invoices. Aunt Evelyn would leave notes on the kitchen counter cover utilities this month. $300. Or family contribution. $1,000. Uncle Marcus, less subtle, would wave receipts and say, "You're working now." Aria, don't be selfish. I complied more often than not. I told myself that peace was cheaper than conflict. Though the cost added up quickly as years passed, their expectations grew bolder. Jordan never seemed to run short of reasons why my savings should fund his lifestyle. 1 week, it was networking dinners in Midtown. And the next, it was keeping up appearances with clients. I was invisible in every way that mattered, yet indispensable when bills arrived. I adapted the way many do. When family pulls tighter, you grit your teeth, pay what you can, and promise yourself that someday you will slip free. But what they did not know was that I had already begun building a future they could not touch. I arrived in New York with less than $5,000 and a secondhand laptop. My first job was lowly copying text into content templates at a digital marketing firm. Yet I watched carefully, taking notes on how campaigns rose or fell. In the evenings, while others scrolled their phones, I studied analytics tools and taught myself to code simple landing pages. That small skill became my wedge into freelance work. One client became 3, then 5. By the end of that year, I had earned nearly $40,000 beyond my salary. I kept quiet. To my family, I was simply doing okay. Still, the one who should help with bills because Jordan was destined for bigger things. They never asked where my late nights went or why I carried 2 phones. And I did not volunteer the truth. Meanwhile, their demands pressed harder. When Aunt Evelyn needed surgery, not fully covered by insurance, I sent an anonymous cashier's check for $72,000. She praised a family friend who had stepped in. I nodded and said nothing. When Jordan wanted a down payment for his latest car lease, $25,000 appeared from a mysterious benefactor. Again, I stayed silent. And when Uncle Marcus claimed the roof on their country house needed repair, I arranged through a contractor to cover $31,000 in expenses. They never suspected me. Why would they? In their eyes, I was dependable, not extraordinary. The irony was sharp. By the time I reached 24, my freelance work had grown into a proper agency. I hired 2 part-time designers, then a project manager. We signed contracts with lifestyle brands and small tech firms. Revenue in that year alone surpassed $500,000. The numbers felt unreal. Yet the work was real enough. Late nights debugging, client calls across time zones, weekends hunched over proposals. Still, I kept my success sealed. When relatives asked, I shrugged and said, "Oh, the website is keeping me busy." To them, I was still the quiet niece, useful for errands and silent when overlooked. I did not correct their assumptions. A part of me wanted to see what they would do with ignorance. If you have ever worked twice as hard to receive half the recognition, the satisfaction of holding a secret victory close to your chest. The breakthrough came one spring when a fashion influencer featured a client's product in a video. Orders surged so sharply. Our servers buckled. That single post generated over $100,000 in revenue. I reinvested every penny into stronger infrastructure and new staff. By my 25th birthday, my company's valuation exceeded $3 million. Yet when I joined family dinners, I still slipped quietly into the least noticeable chair. They had no idea. Aunt Evelyn still pressed me to cover her credit card balances until the inheritance sorts itself out. Uncle Marcus still dismissed me as the practical one. Jordan still basked in attention for ventures that fizzled after a few months. None of them saw the company registration forms bearing my name, or the bank statements with commas in places they had never imagined. For me, I should have seen what was coming when Evelyn began asking pointed questions. Do you really work that much? You never seem tired. Or when Jordan remarked, "Funny how you never complain about money, even though you earned so little." Their curiosity was a seed, and I ignored it. Little did I realize that seed would sprout into suspicion, then into the storm that changed everything. But for the moment, I savored the contrast. By day, I built an enterprise, brick by digital brick. By night, I remained the overlooked niece, dismissed in favor of Jordan's endless stories. What they did not know was that the foundation of their next great betrayal was already under construction. If you have ever been underestimated by your own kin, tell me in the comments. Did you hide your progress or flaunt it? I hid mine. And soon you will see why that decision set the stage for the confrontation. I could never have imagined. The gathering was called a celebration brunch, hosted in a rooftop hall above Midtown, to the outside world. It looked like a family event, wrapped in warmth, linen-draped tables, champagne glasses, ready to clink, and a banner strung with Jordan's name. To me, it was just another stage where I would stand in the wings while the spotlight followed him. Still, I went, habit kept me tethered to their orbit, even when I told myself I had grown free. From the moment I arrived, I sensed the shift. Aunt Evelyn clasped my arm too tightly. Uncle Marcus's smile was all teeth. A leather folder rested on the table near their seats. Its corners worn from handling. I had seen that kind of folder before bankers and lawyers carried them. Aria. Evelyn cooed, sliding the folder closer. We need a signature today. Just a small formality. I opened the first page and felt my throat tighten. A power of attorney, granting them authority over my accounts and property. At the bottom, a notary seal waited. Jordan leaned back, smug. Either you sign or you're out. No home. No protection. Nothing. Think carefully, clock's ticking. It was an ultimatum. Plain and sharp. My glass shook in my hand. The sound of laughter from other tables blurred into static. For a moment, I thought I might faint. My legs wobbled. My heart raced. Then came the cruelty unveiled. Evelyn leaned in, voice raised enough for nearby guests to hear, "You are useless without US. It's just a burden we have carried." Marcus added, with a chuckle, "Be grateful we even let you in the family photo. If you have ever been called worthless by those who should love you, you know how the words pierce? I felt the sting. But underneath it rose something hotter. Stadia. Something inside me hardened. My back straightened, my jaw clenched. I slid the folder shut and whispered, "No." The room fell into silence. Jordan's grin faltered. Evelyn's face flushed crimson. Marcus muttered, "Don't be foolish. Girl." But I was not a girl anymore. I stood, leaving the folder on the table. Outside, cool air rushed against my skin. For the first time, I realized my silence had never been strength to them. It had been permission. That night, I vowed permission would end. I began to gather evidence. Bank statements showing unexplained withdrawals, receipts matching Jordan's car payments, old emails from Evelyn directing reimbursements out of my trust. Each page I slid into a red folder until it bulged. By dawn, I called a lawyer, Miss Quinn. Her voice was calm, professional. She explained guardianship had ended years ago, and any document signed under pressure could be voided. The trust, she confirmed, was due to vest in my soul name at 25. "You have more power than you think," she said. Her words steadied me. Fear gave way to determination. For the first time in years, I saw the chessboard. Clearly they had moved pieces, assuming I would never lift my own. If you have ever been betrayed so deeply, you could hardly breathe. You understand the shift. The moment despair hardens into resolve. I realized then they had mistaken my quiet for weakness. They had no idea what was coming. By the time the follow-up meeting arrived, I was no longer trembling. We gathered not at a glittering brunch, but in a quiet conference room on the top floor of a midtown hotel. The air smelled of polished wood and coffee, and the city hummed faintly beyond the tall windows. This time I had not come alone. Melavier, Miss Quinn, was already at the long table, her briefcase open, papers aligned with precision. Beside her sat a representative from the trustee's office, a woman named Miss Harris, whose calm presence carried more weight than any champagne toast. At 9 sharp, the door opened. Evelyn entered first, Jordan behind her, Marcus close at heel. Their expressions carried the smugness of people who still believed the outcome had been decided. Jordan tossed his coat on a chair, stretched as though he owned the room. Evelyn leaned on the table with a smirk. "Let's not waste time," she said. "Arya, sign what we discussed, and we'll be done." I folded my hands and let them speak. Marcus chuckled. "This shouldn't take long. She knows what's good for her." They had no idea what was waiting. I reached into my bag and placed a folder on the table, thicker than theirs, bound with red tape. Miss and Quinn slid it open and spoke evenly. "Before any signatures are made, certain matters must be clarified." Evelyn's smile faltered. Jordan leaned forward, curiosity edging his confidence. "These," Miss Quinn continued, spreading out pages, "are certified statements from the trustee. They show the education trust created by your late sister is intact and scheduled to vest in Arya's sole name at age 25. Guardianship ended years ago. Any power of attorney you attempted to secure is invalid." Silence thickened. Miss Harris added gently, "We also discovered disbursements totaling $280,000 funds redirected toward car leases and personal expenses not authorized under the trust. Those responsible will be held liable." The color drained from Jordan's face. Evelyn's jaw dropped. Marcus muttered, "That can't be right." But his voice quavered. I spoke for the first time. My voice surprised me with its steadiness. "You told me I was a burden. You told me this life wasn't mine. Yet here are the records. The company I built now holds contracts worth over $3 million. The trust is mine alone. And the debts you ran up in my name, those will follow you." "Not me," Evelyn sputtered. "You're lying." Miss Quinn tapped the notarized seals. "These documents prove otherwise. Contesting them would invite legal consequences. You cannot afford." Jordan pushed back his chair, eyes wide. "You running a company, that's impossible." I leaned across the table. "Impossible is what you called me when I worked nights. Impossible is what you said when I paid bills you thought came from strangers. Look at me now and tell me again." For the first time in years, the room belonged to me. They sat frozen, struggling to reconcile the picture they had painted with the reality before them. Evelyn's face flushed crimson. Marcus's hands gripped the chair. Jordan stared at the papers as though they were written in a language he could not read. Their silence was everything I had imagined and more. If you've ever dreamed of the moment when those who doubted you finally see the truth, the satisfaction that surged through me. But I did not gloat. Instead, I placed one final envelope on the table. Inside were letters prepared by Miss Quinn, restraining orders, cease and desist notices, the legal armor I had once thought I would never need. These stay sealed if you honor the boundaries I set. Cross them. And they go straight to the court. The balance of power had flipped so completely that the air itself felt different. They had entered expecting an easy victory. They left in stunned silence, carrying the weight of their own undoing. And as I gathered my folder, I thought this was only the beginning. The days after that confrontation were quieter than I expected. No shouting calls, not surprise visits. But silence can be its own strategy. I knew better than to believe my Aunt Evelyn or my cousin Jordan had given up. Pride does not dissolve overnight. It calcifies, then cracks in desperate ways. The first attempt came wrapped in roses. A bouquet so large it barely fit through my apartment door, arrived with a card scribbled in Evelyn's script. Family is family. Let's not let paperwork divide us. I placed the flowers in the hallway vase and closed the door. Next came gifts. Jordan sent an expensive watch. One I knew cost more than $12,000. Then a new handbag. Tags still attached. Each package carried the same message. We made mistakes, but let's move forward. I left them untouched. What I had learned is this: apologies that arrive in designer boxes are not apologies at all. They are investments in control. When gifts failed, they tried intermediaries. Mutual friends reached out. They're worried. Can't you sit down one more time? My answer was calm. There will be no more meetings. Boundaries are set, but desperation escalated. Marcus called late one night, his voice tight. We can't lose access to the trust. We've built our lives around it. I told him plainly, that was your mistake. Not mine. Legal consequences soon followed. With Miss Quinn's help, I filed motions that froze accounts tied to the questionable disbursements. $280,000 they had siphoned was now marked for repayment. The trustee's office issued notices. Failure to comply could mean charges of fraud. Evelyn raged. I am told, but her rage had nowhere to land. The law does not bend for bruised pride. Meanwhile, my life steadied. My company thrived. New contracts poured in. And the team I had built worked with a loyalty my blood relatives had never shown. They became my true family, celebrating milestones, checking in on long nights, offering encouragement without strings. When I shared my ordeal, they nodded with understanding. Many had their own stories of being underestimated, overlooked, or used. That solidarity was worth more than any inheritance. The justice, I felt, was not born of revenge, but of release. I had no need to shout, no urge to embarrass them publicly. Natural consequences did the work. Without my quiet support, their credit lines shrank. Without access to the trust, their luxuries faltered. Friends who once admired their generosity began to notice the cracks. Invitation dwindled. Their voices in social circles softened. There were moments of temptation to broadcast the truth and to watch them squirm under the light they once shone only on Jordan. But each time I remembered the silence when I had needed help, justice was already at work. I did not need to lift a hand. Still, I thought of the innocent ones, Jordan's two young children, too small to understand the schemes of their parents. For them, I created education funds, locked and managed by independent trustees. The money would carry them to futures untainted by the mistakes of those before them. I did not announce it to the family. Some gifts are pure only when given in secret. If you have ever been told that family loyalty means submission, I hear this. Boundaries are not cruelty. They are survival. Evelyn and Marcus continued their flailing efforts. One day, Evelyn showed up unannounced at my office lobby, demanding to see me. Security escorted her out, gently but firmly. Another time, Jordan staged a public apology at a cafe where he knew I would be. He knelt by my table, voice loud enough for strangers to hear. is begging for just one more chance. I sipped my coffee, stood, and left him on the tiled floor. Desperation is loud when dignity is gone. Through it all, me resolve held. Each attempt they made only proved why distance was necessary. Each desperate gesture confirmed the wisdom of choosing the high road. Sometimes justice does not arrive with fanfare. It arrives in small, steady truths, contracts signed with loyal colleagues, laughter shared with friends who expect nothing, peace in a home unbroken by manipulation. That, to me, was justice enough. If you believe true justice is living well despite betrayal, tell me in the comments. Or if you have a better way of handling family desperation, share your idea. I would like to hear, because the story was not quite finished. A new chapter was waiting. One not about desperation or exposure, but about growth. And I was ready to step into it. 6 months passed before I realized how much lighter my days had become. The silence that once frightened me now felt like freedom. I woke without dread, brewed my morning coffee without wondering what bill or demand might arrive, and walked to the office with the kind of ease that comes only when you know no one holds a secret leash around your neck. The apartment I rented became a home. I repainted the walls pale blue, set fresh plants along the windowsill, and replaced the worn couch with a sturdy oak table where friends could gather. It was a modest place, but every corner carried my choice, not someone else's command. Sometimes I would pause by the door, hand on the knob, and think, this is mine, wholly mine. My chosen family grew in those months. Colleagues became confidants, neighbors became friends. We shared dinners that stretched into laughter, birthdays that meant more than obligatory gatherings, and quiet evenings where presence was enough. What blood relatives had denied me unconditional belonging? I found among those who asked nothing but honesty. The company flourished too. Within a year, we expanded to a second office across the river, hired new staff, and secured contracts worth more than $5 million. Recognition followed an industry award, a feature in a business journal. I accepted these milestones with gratitude, not pride, because each was built on nights of labor that no one could erase. From time to time, my old family tried to return a voicemail here, a letter there. Evelyn called once when Marcus faced cash flow trouble. Jordan reached out after whispers spread about my foundation. Each message carried the same undercurrent need. Not love, I answered politely, set boundaries, and moved on. Their patterns had not changed. But Mina had the greatest lesson I found was that family is not determined by blood, but by behavior. Love without respect is not love. Loyalty without reciprocity is not loyalty. I learned that saying no is not cruelty, it is clarity. And clarity is a form of peace. Looking back, I see that every slight, every dismissal, every cruel word pushed me toward building a life they could not control. Pain was my teacher, patience was my tool. And the best revenge turned out not to be confrontation, but simply living fully, joyfully beyond their reach. If you have ever had to choose between family loyalty and self-respect, the weight of that decision, tell me, do you believe blood ties deserve automatic forgiveness? Or should love be earned through consistent care? Share your story in the comments. I want to hear how you have defined family for yourself. Because here is the truth. I now hold sometimes the family we choose is stronger than the one we are born into. Sometimes walking away is the only way forward. And sometimes the life you build after betrayal is brighter precisely because of what you endured. So I move ahead, not bitter, but whole. Each day I step into is proof that my worth was never theirs to grant or deny. And that, at last, is enough. Our story. 2 Carl is my name. I'm 29 years old. And my family has always picked on me, not literally, but in the manner that every family meal is prepared, every party, and jokes at my expense somehow found their way back into every holiday. My parents were able to pass off brutality as harmless banter. My younger sister, Rachel, was the sensitive one who required more care, while my elder brother, Mark, was the golden kid, me. It was my responsibility to embrace the role they had set for me, laugh along with it, and toughen up. I did for years. I pretended their laughing didn't hurt. I smiled through the jabs about my little flat or my poor clothing and let it fall off my shoulders. Yet underneath that cultivated grin, bitterness was subtly accumulating like steam in a kettle. It had always been the same dynamic. My father was a finance professional, the kind of man who valued possessions like homes, vehicles, and bank accounts. My mother always reminded us that looks are crucial by acting like the ideal hostess. Mark did what his father had done. As Rachel leaned into her role as the perennial kid, he climbed the corporate ladder with his chest puffed out. They scoffed when I decided to forego the corporate machine and launch my own little business. Regardless of how old she was, they thought my desire to play entrepreneur was adorable. Every time I brought up my job, for a moment, the room would go silent. Then, as if it weren't important to acknowledge that quiet was more profound than laughs, someone would shift the topic. A few years ago, after a long day at work, I arrived for a dinner that I will never forget. I had been taking the bus everywhere because my automobile had broken down the previous week. Despite my fatigue, I felt pleased. My first big contract, which would sustain my firm for the upcoming year, had just closed. I hoped they would inquire about my well-being. Instead, give me even a little encouragement. My father grinned and lifted his glass. Cheers to Mark's recent advancement. Carl continues to use public transportation in the interim. You'll earn enough money by a used automobile eventually. So don't worry, son. Everyone chuckled, even Rachel, who was unemployed at the time, burst out laughing. On the inside, I felt like I was shrinking that night. Yet I recall faking a laugh and nodding along in my apartment, lying awake. I promised myself that I wouldn't let them witness my infidelity. I wouldn't let them feel good about being correct about me. I would put forth more effort, be more intelligent, and labor in secret to create something they couldn't mock. I no longer sought their approval. When they discovered they had underestimated me, I was observing their reactions. My motivation stemmed from that thinking each long day, each setback, every uncertainty. I kept thinking about the supper. I turned it into drive as their laughter reverberated. After a few years, things gradually altered. Then everything at once, my company expanded. What began as a small consultancy business grew into a company with significant worldwide accounts of clients and enough income to not just survive, but flourish. At first, I lived simply and reinvested everything as I grew. But after a while, I realized that success was more than simply spreadsheet figures. It was the type of success that you could drive, walk into, and touch. I purchased a home. I purchased a vehicle, a Rolls Royce, a fantasy automobile, the type of thing Dad used to mention in magazines and remark, "Now that's a real man's car." Wasn't just any car. I recall my first time sitting in it with hands on the steering wheel. I'm thinking, I wish they could see this because I wanted them to choke on their words. Not because I need their approval. I had an idea in the back of my mind when my mother called me last month to invite me to family dinner. We should all catch up, like old times, because it had been too long. She said nonchalantly, however, and her tone made it clear. A motivation was always present. Perhaps Mark wants to brag about a recent promotion. Perhaps they needed to include me in another drama that Rachel was involved in. In any case, I was aware of the outcome. After listening to their boasts, I would sit there and absorb the customary barbs about how I was still the odd one out. However, things were different this time. This time, I was more than willing to overlook the fact that I had something they were unaware of. I wore a simple outfit on the evening of the dinner. It wasn't ostentatious or blatantly wealthy. Simple pants and a button-up shirt. Yes, I did contact my driver, and I instructed him to wait in the Rolls outside the restaurant until I gave the all clear entering the building. I could already feel the old tension returning, as if I were resuming a role I had outgrown but was unable to completely leave. My family was laughing before I even got to them, as the hostess escorted me to the table where they were seated. Dad was in the middle of a story when they saw me. Rachel was drinking wine and grinning smugly, and Mark was nodding like a mirror image of him. Although the greetings appeared friendly, they were actually the same condescension I had been exposed to growing up. First, dinner is anticipated, tales of Mark's major achievement at work, grievances regarding Rachel's hectic schedule, which, as far as I could tell, it still mostly involved social gatherings and shopping. The turn toward me was inevitable. Dad reclined in his seat. As I tugged at his mouth, I recognized that smirk as well. "Carl, are you still riding the bus now?" He inquired, loud enough to be heard from the nearby tables. Mark laughed. Mom let out a pathetic sigh as if she were ashamed for me. And Rachel hid her smile with her palm. Everything seemed so familiar. The punchline, the setup, and the amusement directed at me. However, I sensed something different this time. I didn't become any smaller. I wasn't trying to laugh. I gently got up, set my napkin down on the table, and allowed a grin to appear on my face. Funny. I responded in a steady, keyed voice. "For the past hour, my driver has been waiting outside in the Rolls." The laughter abruptly stopped. Forks stopped in midair. Mark, the smile wavered. Dad's face twitched as if he wasn't sure he had heard correctly. And Rachel's eyes widened. The first to break the stillness was Mom. She hardly raised her voice beyond a whisper. "Rolls. What rolls?" The moment's weight hovered over the table like a brewing storm, and everything changed at that point. After I finished speaking, there was a heavy, quiet, as though everyone in the restaurant had leaned in to listen to what would come next. I could still hear my mother's voice in my brain, faint and trembling. Rolls. What rolls on her plate? Her fork lay. Forgotten. Her gaze darted to my dad as though he had an explanation or could use a witty remark to dismiss what I had just said. Dad, however, remained silent. He only gazed at me, eyes squinted. A thin line of lips pushed together. He used to look like this when I made a mistake as a child, and he was debating whether to ignore me or give me a lecture. Mark squirmed uneasily in his chair, and Rachel bit her lip as if she were holding back a laugh, not the amused sort. It was anxious, as if she had no idea which way things would go. I carefully took a seat again and let my serenity cover them like a blanket. I didn't have to give an explanation. Not quite yet. The beauty of the situation was allowing them to reflect on it and come to terms with the fact that, for once, they were not in control. Still, it's true to tradition. Dad didn't want me to take center stage. He forced a grin back onto his face by clearing his throat. Albeit, inadvertently. Don't overstate a role. Carl, are you taking the dealership's test drive? That's what I've read folks do. For a night. Pretending it's not the same as having one in real life. Condescension permeated his remarks, as if he were embarrassed, and tossing me a rope. In actuality, though, he was attempting to drag me back to where they believed I belonged. Mark interrupted with a silky yet arrogant voice. Yes, Carl, it's all right. Everybody embellishes things occasionally. It's similar to when Rachel claimed to be going vegan for a month, but yet managed to sneak in chicken nuggets. There's no shame in it. But let's be reasonable. Shall we? He attempted to make his forced chuckle seem kind, as though he were the elder brother who understood, encouraged by Mark's tone. Rachel added her voice next. It's just that you've always been a bit theatrical about things. Carl, do you recall acting as though you had won the jackpot when you received that little bonus at your previous job? A role? That is, simply said, that's not you. She gave me a charming grin, but her comments were scathing and intended to cut through any self-assurance I had built up, though not as loudly as previously. The three of them managed to make it into another family joke by trying to block out what I had said. With the sigh of disappointment that she had mastered, my mother shook her head slowly. Carl, all we want is for you to be grounded. When reality sets in, we don't want you to create castles in the sky and then fall apart. Watching you struggle is difficult enough. But having to endure this kind of daydream is far more difficult, since that was her tactic. Her remarks hurt more than the direct jeering. She kept me grounded by making violence seem like kindness, as if she was helping me by putting me down, and I had already come to terms with it. I had discreetly accepted the remarks, put them aside, and promised myself that one day I would disprove them. However, as I sat there surrounded by their smug expressions, I came to a realization. I had previously shown everything, therefore I didn't need to do it again. I still wasn't prepared to raise my hand. Not quite yet. Rather, I leaned back and smiled at them. Just enough to make them uncomfortable, but not enough to prove anything. Yes, I said plainly, leaving my words lingering, you could be correct. They appeared relieved for a little period, as though I was reverting to the role they had anticipated of me. But because I knew what others didn't, my heart was thumping within, not out of dread, but with eagerness. The evidence that the regulations weren't a fiction lay outside, illuminated by streetlights. It wasn't a rental or a loaner. I owned it, paid for in full, and they will witness it firsthand when the time came. However, rather than enjoying supper as a family, the talk continued to go more into the same old patterns. Dad started telling a tale about how recruiters were virtually pleading with Mark to join them after he was headhunted by another company. Carl, that's the definition of success. Dad stated sharply, when people see how valuable you are and come for you, you're chasing after clients who are struggling to make ends meet. Rachel let out a loud sigh as she described how anxious she was about organizing her Paris networking trip. It had not been paid for by her. Naturally. Her father was hiding it, but she presented it as an exhausted entrepreneur in dire need of relaxation. Rachel deserved it after all the pressure she was under, Mom said as she nodded and patted her hand. As they heaped compliments on one another and poked fun of me, I sat there with my plate hardly touching. They didn't inquire about my company. They were indifferent. They saw me as the same Carl who had arrived years earlier, exhausted from riding the bus, attempting to discuss a transaction they couldn't bring themselves to acknowledge. They were mistaken, but nothing had changed. And I'd make sure they realized how mistaken they were very shortly then, with his eyes narrowing. Dad leaned forward and posed the question that sparked the rest of the evening. Tell us, Carl, why don't we see this role for ourselves if it's real? Or are you worried that it could vanish out of thin air? He laughed as he said it, but I could sense the challenge in his tone. The lure, I knew precisely how I was going to respond while he was hanging Dad's comments. A challenge wrapped in comedy lingered in the air. However, I sensed the underlying animosity. Why don't we have a look at it? He had stated his laughter compelled him to look at me, threatening to either double down or back down. Mom's voice broke the tension before I could even open my mouth to laugh it off or brush it off. Leaning forward with the deceptively friendly smile she employed just before twisting the knife, she replied, actually, perhaps we ought to see. Carl has to set the record straight. Stop these tales before they become too huge. You know, her tone altered slightly as she looked around the table, as if she were speaking to the others. Yet, loudly enough for me to hear, I'd hate to see him seem as foolish as he once did. Do you recall the time he claimed to be getting promoted only to be fired instead? Immediately there was laughter. Mark grinned. Rachel burst out laughing. I merely sat there, motionless in my chair, while even my father smiled. It struck me in a way their derision hadn't in years. When my mother brought up one of the most difficult and embarrassing moments of my life and presented it as a dinner story, it was no longer teasing. It was more than a remark. It was blatantly obvious treachery. She was aware of the struggle I had endured after leaving that position and the manner I had battled my way to success. Yet here she was, using that failure as a source of amusement. Mark smiled and lifted his glass. Yes, indeed. Carl, the dreamer, how could we forget him? Talking big and crashing harder are constants. He clattered his glass on his father's, but at least it's a good story. Isn't it? Rachel couldn't help but add her voice. Or when he wore that sweater from the thrift store to Christmas and referred to it as antique. She took a sniff of her wine. We ought to begin documenting these Carl's best songs. It was more than simply what they said. It was the way they treated me at the table as like I were not an equal, as though I were the clown's amusement. There, to boost their self-esteem, I could feel my nails digging into my hands as my fists clenched beneath the table. A part of me wanted to get up, yell, leave them alone in their little conceited world, and go away. A different part of me, though, knew better. Now was not the moment to leave. Now was the moment to pay attention and give them the impression that they had won. Because the fall would be more difficult, the higher they rose on their tower of hubris, even so, it was painful at the time. I was unable to refute it. The individuals who were meant to be my family were sitting there making fun of me, laughing at the blood and dragging out ancient scars. I had an inside sensation, hardened. What little hope I still had that perhaps their perception of me might change in the future. Perhaps they would accept me eventually. Broken that evening, they were really explicit about it. They were unwilling to comprehend me. They have no interest in my success. They wanted me to be weak, reliant, and embarrassed. The cosmos then seemed to be trying to see how much more I could handle. Dad leaned forward once more. His voice had a new edge that I had never heard before. Yet, it was quieter now. Maybe it's time for you to start paying back. Carl, if this business of yours is genuine, Rachel has needs, and Mark has been carrying too much. For once, you may take charge and support your family. Startled, he blinked at him. It was no longer just teasing. It was a request, a demand laced with shame, as if what I had gone through before were suddenly forgotten. I owed them now. They hadn't helped me while I was struggling to make ends meet. I didn't even have faith in me when I first started. However, they saw the slightest hint that I could have anything. I noticed no encouragement or pride in their eyes. Anger was the cause. Mom gave a nod. She brushed her fingers over Rachel's That's right. You are aware of the high cost of her vacation to Paris. Additionally, Mark has always been extremely kind and helpful to us. Carl, it wouldn't hurt to lighten the load. Families act in this way. Rachel smiled as sweetly as she could and put down her drink. Carl, it did mean a lot. You've always desired inclusion, don't you? This is your opportunity. Just for a second, my throat constricted. They weren't only making fun of me. They were flying like vultures around me. Then I understood what I had been reluctant to acknowledge. I wasn't considered family by them. I was considered a resource by them, something to take advantage of once I was of use. That was the moment everything changed. The betrayal wasn't just their laughter or their stories at my expense. It was their intent. They didn't want me to succeed for me. They wanted me to succeed for them so they could carve up the pieces and call it support. And as I sat there, forcing myself to stay calm while their voices droned on about how helping out was the least I could do, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. This wasn't going to end with me giving them what they wanted. It was going to end with them seeing just how badly they had underestimated me. I left that dinner feeling hollow. Late, like someone had scooped me out from the inside and left nothing but a shell walking toward the door. Their words followed me, sticking to my skin like smoke, always talking big. Step up for once. Help out your family. They rang in my ears with every step I took away from the restaurant. When I got outside, the Rolls was there, gleaming under the streetlights. The driver, standing by, ready to open the door. For a second, I thought about signaling him, making a scene, letting my parents and siblings see the proof of everything I'd built. But I stopped myself. Not yet. Walking past the glass windows, I could see their silhouettes still sitting around the table, laughing like nothing had happened. Like I hadn't just been gutted in front of them. My hand tightened on the car door handle, and I whispered under my breath, "Not yet. You'll see soon enough." Then I slid inside. That night, lying in my bed, I felt the weight of years pressing down on me. I thought about every moment I had sat quietly while they mocked me. Every time I had swallowed my pride, telling myself one day it would be different. But it never was. I had been waiting for them to change, for them to finally see me as more than the family joke, but they never would. And the realization hit me harder than their laughter. Nothing I did, no amount of success would ever earn me the acceptance I'd once wanted. So badly, the pain of that truth cut deep for years. I had fueled myself on the idea of proving them wrong. And now, even with everything I had, even with a life most people would envy, I still felt small in that restaurant chair because I'd been chasing the wrong thing all along. I didn't need them to approve of me. I needed to accept that their approval had never mattered in the first place. But that didn't mean I was going to let them walk all over me again. No. If they wanted to paint me as the failure, the dreamer, the broke one, they were about to find out how wrong they were. Still, revenge wasn't something I could rush if I acted too fast. It would look like defensiveness, desperation. I needed patience, timing, precision. So I started planning quietly in ways they wouldn't see coming. The first step was distancing myself. When Mom texted me the following week with a reminder about Rachel's Paris trip, I didn't respond when Dad called, asking if I could contribute something toward family expenses. I let it ring when Mark emailed me a thinly veiled pitch about investing in one of his side ventures. I didn't even open the attachment. I went silent. The silence drove them crazy. They weren't used to me. Withholding, weren't used to me not playing the role they'd assigned me for the first time. I wasn't accessible, wasn't available to be their punching bag or their wallet. And though the loneliness was real because a part of me still longed for a family that didn't exist, I could feel a quiet strength building inside me. Still, it wasn't easy. There were nights I lay awake wondering if I was wrong, wondering if maybe I should just give them something, and maybe the pressure would ease, maybe the mocking would stop, maybe they'd let me in, even if it was only because of what I could provide. But then I'd remember Mom's smile as she dragged up my lowest moment, Dad's tone when he demanded I start giving back Rachel's saccharine little. It mean a lot. And the ache in my chest would harden into resolve again. I was done begging for scraps of their respect. If they wouldn't give it freely, I'd take it by force. By showing them in a way they couldn't ignore that I wasn't the one who needed them. They were the ones who needed me. And as I quietly pulled back, letting them stew in confusion, the pieces of my plan began to form. I wouldn't lash out in anger. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. No. I would wait. I would build. And when the moment came, I turned the very things they mocked me for into the weapons of their undoing. The rock bottom wasn't just their betrayal at that dinner. The real rock bottom was the quiet acceptance that my family would never be the family I wanted. And the rise from that pit wouldn't be about them anymore. It would be about me reclaiming the power I'd given away for far too long. It was only a matter of time. The weeks that followed felt strangely quiet for the first time in years. I wasn't tethered to the constant tug of war with my family. No answering texts that dripped with manipulation. No forced smiles at dinners where I was the butt of the joke. No. Hello. Maybe next time. Excuses. When they dangled invitations to events they knew I couldn't afford. I had stepped back completely. And in that silence, I found space to breathe. And in that breathing space, something shifted. My work took on a new rhythm without the weight of their voices echoing in my head. I poured myself fully into my business. Clients who had once seemed out of reach suddenly weren't deals I'd been hesitant to chase now felt within my grasp. It was as if cutting out the poison had cleared my vision, and for the first time, I could see just how much I was capable of Within 6 months, my firm doubled in size, then tripled. We landed a partnership with a major international company, something that sent ripples through my entire industry. Calls poured in, invitations to conferences, keynote speeches, panels. My calendar filled faster than I could keep up. The long hours that once felt grueling now felt like momentum, like a wave. I was finally writing instead of fighting against, and with that success came choices I'd never had before. The rules was just the beginning. I bought a penthouse overlooking the city, glass walls that let me watch the skyline at night like it belonged to me. I traveled London, Tokyo, Sydney, not for show, but because my work and my life demanded it. The boy who used to ride the bus, clutching his worn backpack while rehearsing excuses for why he couldn't join his family's expensive outings, now had access to the world. And with each step forward, the old insecurities slipped further away. But here's the thing, I didn't flaunt it. Not publicly. Not yet. I didn't plaster my success all over social media. I didn't call home with updates. I let them think whatever they wanted to think because I knew sooner or later curiosity would eat at them. Their silence wasn't concern. It was calculation. If they weren't asking questions yet, it was because they were waiting for the right moment to circle back. And eventually they did. It started with Mom. A casual message, as if we hadn't gone months without speaking. Carl, honey, how have you been? We miss you. Maybe you could come by for dinner. Just like old times, I read it 3 times before setting my phone down. Smiling faintly, old times. As if those dinners had been anything more than stages for my humiliation, I didn't reply. Then Rachel reached out, sending me pictures from Paris with captions like, "Wish you could have been here." Followed by the way, do you know a good way to transfer large amounts of money internationally? Asking for a friend. Subtle as a brick. I didn't answer. Finally, Mark called. He didn't even try for small talk. Look, Carl, I know we've given you a hard time in the past, but you know it's all love, right? Family's family. Anyway, I've got this new investment opportunity you might be interested in. Huge returns. If you want to finally get in on something big, now's the time. I hung up before he finished his pitch. The silence I gave them wasn't just distance anymore. It was control. For years, I had been the one waiting for scraps, waiting for them to acknowledge me. Now the tables had turned, and they didn't even realize it. They were the ones waiting, circling, probing for an opening, and I wasn't giving them one. Not yet. Instead, I focused on building something even stronger. My firm wasn't just profitable. It was becoming influential. We weren't just taking clients. We were shaping markets. I hired a team. I trusted people who respected me, not because of my last name or because they had to, but because of what I could create, that respect, that loyalty. It was worth more than any hollow approval my family had ever withheld. And quietly, I began positioning myself for the moment I knew was coming. The moment they would demand proof, the moment their curiosity would crack open into desperation, I kept the roles. Yes, but I also bought something subtler. A fleet of black sedans for my team, a driver service under my name. I invested in property not just for myself, but for the firm, offices in 3 cities, each one a monument to the empire I was building, because when the time came and I knew it would, I wasn't just going to show them a car. I wasn't going to flash. One symbol of success, and let them dismiss it as luck or timing. No. I was going to show them the full scope of what I had become in a way they couldn't laugh off, couldn't reduce to a joke at dinner. The rise wasn't just about money or status. It was about control. For the first time in my life, I wasn't reacting to them. I wasn't scrambling to defend myself. I was moving deliberately, piece by piece, setting up a stage they didn't even know they'd be standing on. And when the curtain finally rose, they would find themselves not as the audience, but as the spectacle. The real turning point came on a gray Tuesday morning. The kind where the sky looked heavy and the city moved slower than usual. I was in my office, glass walls reflecting a skyline blurred by drizzle, when my assistant walked in with a folder. You'll want to see this, she said, sliding it across my desk. Inside were details about a new client, except not just any client. It was the firm my dad had spent most of his career trying to impress, the one he'd always described as the pinnacle of the industry. The same company he used to wave around at dinner as proof of how close he was to greatness. And now they weren't just working with us, they were working directly under me. My signature was the one on the dotted line. I leaned back in my chair, staring at that folder. My dad had spent years measuring me against a standard I never asked to be measured by. He'd mocked me for not getting there. And now here it was, his holy grail, sitting in a folder on my desk with my name stamped across it. The irony was almost too perfect. But that wasn't the only thing. A week later, during a quarterly dinner hosted by the industry's top players, I overheard something that made my stomach tighten. My dad's reputation, the one he guarded like a crown, wasn't what it used to be. His firm was losing ground. Younger executives were circling like sharks, whispering about outdated strategies, poor leadership, missed opportunities. And in those whispers, one theme kept repeating. His time at the top was running out. That's when it clicked. All those little messages from my family, the sudden attempts to reel me back in, weren't just about reconnecting. They'd sniffed out something. Maybe they'd heard my name mentioned in circles they used to dominate. Maybe they noticed the silence and mistook it for arrogance. Either way, they had realized something was shifting, and they wanted in before it was too late. I didn't confront them. Not yet. Instead, I started gathering information quietly, carefully. Through mutual contacts, I learned that my dad's firm was bidding for a contract they desperately needed. Without it, they'd lose credibility, maybe even key investors. And guess whose firm was also on the shortlist for that same contract? Mine. When I first saw the email confirming it, I just sat there staring at the screen. Years of being mocked for chasing something unrealistic. Years of being told I was the failure, the dreamer, and now, without even trying, I was in a position to decide whether my dad's firm sank or swam. It wasn't just poetic, it was power. Real tangible power. And once I had that in my hands, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I began laying the groundwork. I didn't tell anyone, not my team, not my friends. I let the process play out naturally. Made sure our bid was strong, airtight, impossible to dismiss. Every detail was double checked. Every presentation rehearsed to perfection. We weren't just competing, we were positioning ourselves as inevitable. Meanwhile, I stayed silent with my family. I ignored another dinner invitation, Another friendly call from Mark. Another text from Rachel that said, "Miss you. We should do something soon." I knew what they wanted, and I wasn't going to give them an inch until I was ready. But it wasn't only the contract that gave me leverage. Around that same time, I was invited to join a private circle of executives and investors, the kind of network where decisions were made before they ever hit the public. It was an inner ring my dad had dreamed of entering, but never could. And suddenly I was in the room, shaking hands, trading stories, earning respect, not because of my last name, but because of what I'd built. I remember sitting at one of those meetings, a glass of scotch in my hand, listening to a conversation about upcoming mergers. Someone mentioned my firm as a rising power. Heads nodded around the table, and in that moment, I felt something I'd never felt before. Not just pride, not just vindication, but certainty. Certainty that I had crossed a line I could never be pushed back from. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I wasn't just proving them wrong. I was standing on ground they could never reach. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized the real revenge wasn't just going to be about showing them my success. It was about letting them walk straight into it, thinking they were in control, only to realize they'd been standing on my stage all along. The setup was complete. I had the contract. I had the network. I had the silence, driving them mad with curiosity. All I needed now was the right moment to pull the curtain back. And as fate would have it, that moment arrived sooner than I expected. It happened on a Saturday evening. It is the kind of night my family loved to orchestrate an important dinner at a private club they'd been members of for decades. It was one of those places with heavy oak doors, white tablecloths, and a maitre d' who looked at everyone like they were auditioning for permission to belong. Mom called it a family tradition when she extended the invitation, but I knew better. They wanted to parade Mark's newest promotion, Rachel's Paris escapades, and Dad's enduring reputation, all while setting me up for the usual role of silent spectator. I almost didn't go, but then I thought about the timing. My firm had just been announced as the official recipient of that massive contract. Yes, the very one my dad's company had been clinging to as their lifeline. The news hadn't fully trickled down yet, but within days it would be public. And here they were, inviting me back into their spotlight. The stage wasn't just set, it was practically begging me to step on it. So I accepted. When I arrived, the evening began predictably. Dad was at the head of the table, glass raised, booming voice, filling the room with tales of his industry. Mark's up beside him, nodding eagerly, occasionally chiming in with his own accomplishments. Rachel was draped in some designer dress, scrolling on her phone until she felt the need to chime in with a casual, "Oh, in Paris, we did this." And Mom, of course, smiled approvingly at each of them, turning the spotlight on me only when she wanted to draw out another round of subtle jabs. "Carl," she said sweetly, after the appetizers had been cleared, "we never did see that rolls. You mentioned, you must forgive us for doubting, but you do have a tendency to exaggerate." She let the word linger as if she were sprinkling seasoning onto the table. Mark leaned forward, smirking. Maybe he left it at the dealership again. Rachel giggled. "Twirling, Herr Weinglass." Or maybe it's like that job he said he had once. Remember how that turned out? The table erupted in laughter. And for a moment I just sat there, letting the sound wash over me like I had so many times before. But this time I wasn't shrinking. I wasn't swallowing my pride. I was waiting for the exact moment to turn their stage into mine. When the laughter died down, Dad leaned in, his voice low, almost conspiratorial. Carl, listen, enough games. If you really have something going, it's time to show it. Your family needs you. My firm needs a boost right now. You could finally prove yourself useful. I looked at him steadily. My expression unreadable. Funny you mentioned that. I said, my tone calm, almost casual, because I heard your firm was banking pretty heavily on that upcoming contract with Harrow and Company. His face stiffened, just slightly, but enough for me to notice. It's confidential. He said quickly, how would you even? I leaned back, smiling faintly. Because they signed with us. The silence that followed was unlike anything I'd ever heard from them. No laughter, no smirking, just stillness. Rachel blinked at me, confused. Mark's jaw tightened, his smirk gone. Mom's hand froze halfway to her wine glass. And Dad just stared, his eyes narrowing as if he could pull the words back into my mouth. I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my voice. I just let the truth sit there. Heavy and undeniable. Finally, Mom broke the silence. Her voice, trembling. Us, you mean your firm?
Yes.
I said simply, we closed the deal last week. They're shifting everything over to us. It'll be announced on Monday. Dad's face turned a shade I'd never seen before. Somewhere between pale and livid. Mark opened his mouth and then closed it again. Rachel's phone slipped from her fingers onto the table with a dull thought. I leaned forward, resting my elbows lightly on the table. You've spent years telling me I was the failure, the dreamer, the one who never measured up. And while you were laughing, mocking and dismissing me, I was building something bigger than all of you, combined. Now, the company you've been bragging about for decades, the one you pinned your reputation on, chose me. Not you. Not your firm. Me. The words weren't shouted, but they struck harder than any raised voice could. And watching their faces, watching the weight of reality settle on them was more satisfying than I ever imagined. But I wasn't done, not yet. Because as I sat back, calm and collected, I knew this wasn't just about the contract. This was about showing them once and for all that the roles had reversed. I wasn't the one sitting at their table begging for approval anymore. They were sitting at mine, whether they realized it or not. And I had one more move to make that would seal it completely. The silence at that table stretched so long I could hear the faint clink of cutlery from other diners across the room. My family, always so loud, so sure of themselves. It looked small for the first time in my life. Dad was the first to speak, though his voice had lost its booming confidence. This isn't possible. Harrow and Company has been with us for decades. They wouldn't just. He stopped, his words, strangling in his throat because he knew it was possible. He knew exactly why they would walk away. Because his firm had grown stale while mine was thriving. Mark leaned forward. Disparity? Carl? Listen, maybe this doesn't have to be a competition. We could work together, merge our firms. Even with my experience in your lucky break, we could really. I raised a hand cutting him off. It's not a lucky break. Mark, it's years of work you never saw because you were too busy laughing at me. My voice was steady, calm, the way I'd always wished it could be. In those moments, they tore me down. Rachel's eyes glistened. Her voice pitched higher than usual. Carl, you don't mean to just leave us out, do you? We're family. You know how much I've always supported you. Supported me? I asked, tilting my head by mocking me at every turn, by treating me like a joke at Christmas. No. Rachel, you didn't support me. You drained me, and now you're only reaching out because you see something you want. Mom finally spoke, her voice trembling, but her words sharp as ever. Carl, you can't just turn your back on us. After everything we've done for you, I laughed quietly, shaking my head. Everything you've done to me? You mean you mocked me when I was struggling? You paraded my failures in front of strangers. You only called when you thought I had something to give you. That's not family. That's exploitation. Their faces fell one by one. A slow collapse of the facade. They had always worn. The smugness drained from Mark. The superiority bled from Dad. Even Mom's carefully cultivated composure cracked. Her lips trembling as if she could no longer find the right script. I stood, placing my napkin neatly on the table. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. I looked at them, really looked at them for the first time. Not as the family who had broken me down, but as people who no longer had any power over me. You asked why you haven't seen the rolls. I said, my voice clearance, steady. It's because I don't need to prove anything to you. But since you're so curious, I gestured toward the window outside, under the club's lantern lights. The Rolls-Royce waited at the curb. My driver stood by the door, polished and poised, the emblem gleaming like a quiet truth. Gasps came from the neighboring tables. Heads turned. My family's faces went pale. There was no denying it now. I leaned down slightly, just enough to meet their eyes. This is the last time I let you humiliate me. The next time you think of me as the family joke, remember this. The joke's on you. Then I turned and walked out. The hush of the dining room, broken only by the soft click of my shoes against the marble floor. The maitre d' opened the door as if he'd been waiting just for me. My driver bowed slightly. Pulling the door of the Rolls open, I slid inside without looking back. As the car pulled away, I caught one final glimpse through the tinted glass. My father slumped in his chair, my mother clutching at her pearls, my brothers staring in disbelief, and my sister wiping at her eyes. The empire they had built on mocking me had crumbled in a single evening, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly free. The final line I carried with me, whispered only to myself as the city lights blurred past. I didn't just rise above them. I left them behind,